Three, two, one.
We'd like to welcome you to another edition of GrokTALK, brought to you by New Hampshire's leading conservative blog site, GrokTALK.com. We are your feared, extremist, right-wing, hard-charging, gun-toting, opinionated, outspoken, rabble-rousing, letter-writing, radio microphone stomping conservatives and rational libertarians. So get ready for more news and opinion you could only get from GrokTALK.com.
GrokTALK.
Are we ready?
I think so.
We're ready.
We have no agenda. We just have whatever comes out of our mouths for the next 60 minutes, and that's usually what happens anyway. So we are
Beto,
Guns,
Beto,
Beto,
Robert Francis.
live. We're recording this. Yes. Okay. We appear to be.
We are in the cloud.
We're recording.
Last week.
Robert Francis Beta Male. Yes.
Beta male. Last week we had some technical difficulties and we recorded an excellent hour of content, and you'll have to take our word because it got lost somewhere in the universe and we have no idea where it is. So this week we are hoping for better results, like the first 2 weeks that we did this, and so this is technically week 4, but now it's week 3. So yes, fingers crossed. All right, so we didn't really start an agenda. We have just plenty of things to talk about. I got a couple ideas. One of the first things I wanted to start with was something I'm looking for.
Guns?
Guns. No, we'll get to guns. This is almost as bad. Elizabeth Warren tweeted this week that on my first day as president, I will sign an executive order that puts a total moratorium on all new fossil fuel leases for drilling offshore and on public lands, and I will ban fracking everywhere. So our buddies at the Conservative Treehouse did a really nice job of coming up with a list of the 10 worst, horrible things that will happen as a result of this policy from day one. And I just wanted to kind of go through a few of them and get your thoughts and reactions on them. Obviously, the biggest problem is that right now we've got our own strategic reserve in the ground because we can turn on our fracking and turn off our fracking whenever we want. So we have lots of oil and gas, and we are now the leading global producer of these fuels, and that has afforded us strategic independence and military independence, and has definitely helped us as far as the issues we used to have with reliance on people who hate us for energy that we would need to defend ourselves if they were to attack us. So it has also brought down the price of gas. We've written repeatedly over the last year and a half about how, despite things that have happened in the Middle East with Syria and most recently with Iran, the price of gasoline has barely budged. It has been somewhere between $2.29 a gallon and $2.69 a gallon for regular. And the whole time we've had ships being seized and drones being downed and sabers being rattled. And the reason that price hasn't changed is because of fracking. Elizabeth Warren, the woman with the plan, says, well, my first move is going to be to end that. We're not going to frack anymore. So what does that do? Well, here's a quick list of some of the things at Conservative Treehouse. It immediately hands Vladimir Putin hundreds of billions worth of enhanced Russian energy exports. Oh, yeah, because they really need that money. It supports the regime in Venezuela. It expands the influence of China, their investments in Russian energy, by the way, of which they apparently have a significant sum. It immediately helps the Iranian economy and enhances their stranglehold on power. Geez, I haven't gotten to anybody who's really a friend of ours yet, but that would hurt Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Israel, and Libya. Not all allies necessarily, but still people who are on our side versus the Iranian side. It would return U.S. policy and strategy back to a position of dependence on OPEC, which I just covered briefly. It would raise the cost of everything, not the least of which is gas, heating oil, heating fuel. It would destroy American wages. It would set us back in industrial manufacturing. It would drive jobs out of the U.S. to Mexico and Asia. It would also drive up electricity prices. Would raise the price of gasoline, as they point out, to Obama-era rates when it was up around $5 a gallon by design. And it'll also drive the cost of transportation up. So every good in the world that comes to the U.S. and has to be driven by a truck or on a train or in a plane to get somewhere will cost more, and consumers, especially low-income people and we'll say minorities because that's how the Democrats would spin it, will lose a significant chunk of money that they may not even have because they've lost their jobs because on day one, Elizabeth Warren turned us into a country of dependence. Your thoughts?
She hates
Lots
poor
of
people.
thoughts.
Okay.
Well, they always hate poor people when they tax liquor, when they tax cigarettes, when they make it more expensive to do basic stuff that everybody has to do instead of luxury stuff that some of us have to do. They hate poor people. But worse than that, we worry about the balance of payments, about China, about trade, about tariffs. But, the biggest imbalance of trade was oil imports, which were running, if I'm not mistaken, around $700 billion a year in the late 80s and 90s and early 2000s. And they kept saying, well, we have to use less oil. We have to become less dependent. Donald Trump had a different idea, just like Sarah Palin. Why don't we produce our own? Then we don't give a damn. And meanwhile, if we hand back control of the production to the people that don't like us very much, as Steve pointed out, never mind Vladimir Putin, those nice Saudis that will cheerfully hold hands with our oil drilling presidents or appear to make nice with us, finance terrorism. And if we don't give them the money, they can't finance as much.
True, but I also look at it from a governmental standpoint. I think it's quite clear most of this, the members of this pack of progressives would love to be able to put us back in the pickle. But I look at it as the totalitarian mask is coming out. We are supposed to have a constitutional republic in which those that we elect are supposed to represent us. The Democrat progressive socialists are rapidly moving, if haven't already arrived, at representing to governing to ruling. And there are differences between those three states of being. She can't do what she claims that she can do by executive order, but she's certainly playing to the leftmost part of her party, given that the primaries will be coming up pretty soon. She can stop what's going on public lands, but if leases have already been let offshore, she can't immediately take those out, but she can't stop and just unilaterally say no more fracking, period. It's the same thing with a lot of her other programs. It's the same thing with a lot of these. They want to be the biggest man on campus, but they don't care how they get there or what they're going to do once they get there, other than saying, see, look, I gave you free stuff, without ever saying, yeah, and you're going to pay for it anyways.
Okay, so one more thought on Elizabeth Warren before we go. It's obvious that she and Bernie are splitting the same voters in the Democrat pre-primary polling. So I don't see Bernie dropping out, and I certainly don't see Liz Warren dropping out. Biden, if this keeps up, will probably win the nomination because the real socialists are splitting the hardcore left vote, leaving everybody else who might vote in a Democrat primary to vote for Biden, which means by default he would probably win most of the contests. Neither of them were to drop out. Biden probably still has a pretty good lock on it, even though he's a total bumbling idiot. And if he doesn't drop dead, it's probably his. However, I think Warren is more popular among the nutbag leftist socialists than Bernie Sanders is. She's a little bit younger than he is. She's a woman. She's good at lying. They like that. So what do you think? Do you think well, imagine if Bernie dropped out, would Warren suck it all up and just take the nomination?
I don't think so. I really don't. I don't agree necessarily that Mr. I don't know what I said yesterday is Joe Biden is actually going to last long enough. While I think Julian Castro, the little guy on the soapbox behind the podium, tried to go after Biden the way that he did by saying, you can't even remember anything, trying to bring up the nuance of this guy's senile. We're used to Joe Biden gaffes, but they are getting worse. And while he did show, one of the few who actually watched the entire debate. And it's clear that while Biden had more fight in him than the last one, he's not the Biden that I remember of years ago. He's lost his fastball. He's rapidly losing the curveball. The only thing he's got left now is the screwball. I don't necessarily agree that he's going to be all there because let's face it, I wish to respect my elders, and he certainly is that at this point, but I think he's starting to lose it. And this is not the kind of person I think that the young progressives are going to willingly take on. And remember, the people in both primaries, Republican and Democrat, are those that are the hardcore of each party. And they're going to be evaluating what he says. And given the crowds that are assembling for both of his two other rivals, the Indian and the Moscow living one, I'm not so sure that he'll have enough to split the vote.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. You know, the question is whether Biden gets to the finish line with all of his parts still attached. He had an eyeball trying to jump out. His arms may fly off if he waves them around or grabs hold of the wrong thing. I mean, he's in pretty poor shape. And then he's offering to wrestle with journalists who think he may not be fit enough. That would be a sight to see, or maybe not. The guy's completely delusional about his abilities, and it's a shame. You know, whether you call his service honorable or not, he served a long time in public. He's been vice president, and he should have hung it up when he was at the pinnacle of his career, but he decided to reach higher and is in danger of missing the jump altogether. Liz Warren, I do agree, absolutely appeals to the young, rabid leftists. You'll recall the video I posted from Nutroots 2014, where she had them jumping up and down in the audience waving "was for president" signs back then. So it's clear she's capturing the hardcore and the young. The question is, has Bernie flamed out? Is he too wild, too white, and too old for those same hardcore young leftists?
Steve McDonald here. You ever notice how Democrats like to create problems so they can then claim to solve them? Take Medicaid expansion, for example. Even if the federal government keeps its promise to New Hampshire to pay for most of it, it'll still cost New Hampshire taxpayers tens of millions of dollars more to provide inferior care and coverage to people who, for the most part, would never have needed it if Democrats hadn't reformed health care in the first place. That's right, that real expensive reform that doesn't care if it's only affordable if you act like you don't need insurance. Well, its number one claim to fame at this point is how many more people it forced onto Medicaid. And that's only because Obamacare kicks tens of millions of people off the plan they liked and were told they could keep but couldn't. So Medicaid expansion was always part of Obamacare for a reason. Democrats knew all along that the Affordable Care Act was unaffordable and they'd need to make Medicaid bigger and more expensive. So when people got their plan kicked to the health care curb, they could still sign up for something, even if it was something as crappy as Medicaid. This is Steve McDonald for GrokTALK, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you. GrokTALk. Who's next? Jump in. Guns. All right, go. Guns.
Beto. Finally, a higher level candidate has confirmed what the right has believed all along. They do want our guns, and they are going to confiscate them, and he doesn't care what it is. And I'm so tired, like every other Second Amendment adherent, of this nonsense of buyback, because we didn't buy our guns from the government in the first place, but that's how they act. And I notice that none of them that are actually claiming to want to confiscate all of our guns, a la Australia and New Zealand, have said anything about, well, fine, we're going to pay for the guns, you're going to give them to us, but how are they going to go get them? If you've noticed, there are several states in the unions that have made such bans, and the actual compliance ratio goes from a high of 15% down to about 2%. So I should have worn my shirt that says, I will not comply to this version of GrokTALK. Really, are they going to send the police? Are they going to send county sheriffs? Are they going to send state police? Because law enforcement really is a local environment to do, especially if half the police say, no, we believe that you are now breaking the Constitution, because the left has been playing the game with the word infringe for years. I think they will have finally crossed the line with this confiscation, and it may lead to a civil war, and all it takes is a couple of little incidents, which the right will turn into Waco, and then you're going to have a preference cascade going into play, where everybody says they stood up, I should stand up. There's going to be blood in the left has said anytime more gun freedom happens, there's going to be blood in the streets. No, there hasn't been, but there will be blood in the streets if they try to reduce them by confiscation.
We just posted a article this morning about, not this morning, yesterday morning, about New Zealand, which, we've reported on since the Christchurch massacres, when some commie eco-socialist nutbag purposefully used a rifle, a scary black rifle, to shoot up some mosques because he wanted to start a conversation that led to gun control in Western countries, specifically the United States. New Zealand did ban certain kinds of rifles and shotguns. They did then say, well, hey, we're going to do a buyback. And now they're proposing the next step, which we've all predicted, which is a gun registry, which of course is the precursor to getting the guns, because until you know where they are, you can't go out and find them. And of course, as you pointed out, Skip, the same number of people who have refused to turn their guns in New Zealand, which is extremely high. It's like 70 to 80, maybe even higher percentage of the gun owners who've refused to turn their guns in or send them in for the buyback program, are the same people who are probably not going to go, well, I'm going to register this weapon because you've asked me to. So again, we're to their question, and I think New Zealand, we need to keep watching because they're on a fast track to get this done. And those socialist gun grabbers down there, they want those weapons. So to your question, how do the people of New Zealand deal with, and how does law enforcement go out and register or collect these weapons? And I think you're absolutely right. I don't think the rural population of New Zealand is going to stand for it any more than the rural population of America would.
I don't think so either. Britain lost its guns slowly over a century until we got to the Dunblane massacre at a school where one guy decided to shoot the place up and the government decided to ban practically all guns. It was a long, slow process. New Zealand is much more sparsely populated than the UK. If you're out in the sticks, you're out in the sticks, and you'd better have a gun for self-defense and for the defense of your family. I don't think these people are going to give them up. And I think the same attitude is going to take place here. If you bought the gun before anybody started counting, you ain't going to offer them up for counting. They're not going to get registered. They're just going to be in somebody's closet or gun safe somewhere tucked away or distributed in different parts of the house, whatever. But they are not going to be obvious. And they're
buried in the yard
where you can count. Well, and that too. And you can go out and buy those sealed tubes for burying in different parts of your yard as well. And just hope the police dogs don't know how to sniff out plastic bones. But it's absolutely right. But New Zealand is trying to do this in quick time. And what the people are realizing equally in quick time is it's a really, really bad idea and they're not going to play. And if they try and do all this in the space of not even a generation, but within a couple of years, I think that all the people that know the good reasons why they have guns are going to be very firm in resisting taking them away.
I just say, because I live next to Lake Winnipesaukee, that all of a sudden, if you were to fly a magnometer across the lake, there'd be a whole lot of spikes because of the accidents of, oh, I dropped my gun overboard. Now, they wouldn't say that, we also geolocated it and wrapped it up well in plastic bags for later fishing out, but that's another story. If they were smart, they'd put more pieces of metal in and go fishing with magnets instead of hooks. But the other thing is that I think a lot of Americans, especially those that are veterans, that have already steeled themselves to this, because if you remember, there was purportedly a letter written by over 2,000 special operations troops, former operations troops during the Obama administration, who said, if you do this, you won't be able to stop us. And I'll tell you, it would not be hard to stop the police, because what these leftists don't understand is that there is more of us. And if you put us into that same situation that the Redcoats did at the beginning genesis of this country, which their first act was to confiscate all weapons, you will find that the poor slobs that are sent to go to house will be followed back to their homes. And then the next day when they go out to confiscate more weapons, bad things are going to happen. This Cold War will get hot real quick. And they won't understand that their force, because I don't consider in this case Antifa to be large enough of a force, they will lose. I've already said, a lot of people have said, I'm wearing a shirt that says I will not comply. A lot of other people have said, I will not comply either. Our fellow citizens in other states aren't complying. They haven't gotten the message yet. And I see bad things happening if some of the idiots like Beto or any of the other of those presidential wannabes say, yes, we're going to take your guns. I don't care what soft, silky language they use, but the intent is to take the guns. We're all screwed.
I think a lot of people in law enforcement, obviously not police chiefs who run police chiefs associations in New Hampshire are a good example, but regular law enforcement, a lot of military, they probably wouldn't buy into this. Some would, obviously, but not all. And it begs the question, who do the leftists find to go get the guns? Who's going to do it?
They don't.
Well, yeah, they're going to have to find people from out of area. You mentioned, was it the local police, is it the sheriff's department, or is it the state police? Maybe you can get the state police to go town to town, as long as it's not the towns that they live in. And this is also going to be really interesting. It's going to be where you sort the real law enforcement officers from the bullies in uniform. The ones that have any reverence at all for the Constitution are going to refuse to play, which is going to leave a reduced number to go house to house looking to get slaughtered.
Well, again, I'm going to basically say, even if it's the state police, the same tactics could be used. Years ago, I heard rumors that, during the last years of Obama, a lot of people on the right were saying, this is going to be it. This is where it's going to end. And I heard and was told a lot of different tactics that could be used, all of which are not going to be very fun for the other side, regardless. Because I think when Americans go to war, they go to war. I don't think the left understands the phrase, if you're going to kill the king, kill the king. And they wish to make us the virtual kings. Just look at what they're already doing now with the kinds of names that they've used to come after us at Granite Rock with over the decade plus that we've been involved with. Most of us just throw those words off. But most regular citizens, most normals, hate the idea of being called those names. We're being made to be seen as subhuman, not worth it. We are the problem that must be eliminated.
Glad you said
I deliberately use that word because we've seen this before in history in multiple countries, because we are basically not worth it. Deplorables, irredeemables. I did have that post where I was called a name that was just about the worst that you can call a guy. And that was made to ostracize me. It's made to ostracize you, all the other normals that read Granite Rock or listen to this. There is a serious problem in this country when half the people won't even talk to the other. I've got a post to put up in a little bit out of the Seacoast area of just what putting a political sign on your lawn will do to you. They basically are trying to prep the battlefield as it is. And what they don't understand is that the usage of those words and trying to deny us humanity, at some point they don't understand the Scotch-Irish background of Americans and say, up yours, and it'll boomerang on them. Two letters and 5 letters, no 4-letter words.
Very nice.
No, and just stay the hell off the property of the individuals, because if you invade, you are a criminal.
Well, again, it comes back to that issue with them making you less than human. It was what they did to excuse slavery. It's what they do to justify abortion. And it's what they do to belittle us and make it legitimate to have their street thugs attack us and silence us and eventually to create laws that make that activity legal, which probably is the goal.
Just remember that federal laws are null and void in this area anyway. They're not within the remit of the constitutionally formed federal government. And besides, where I was going with this, and I think where Skip was going, the subhuman is what the Nazis used to label the Jews and what the Muslims used to label other races.
Well, it's the same. It's the supremacy ideology, which I talk about all the time. I lump it all together because people talk about right and left and they confuse Nazis and They try to call us that, and we know it's not true. But what you're really talking about is a supremacy ideology. You're talking about an ideology where you have one ruling class, and everything they say and do is the law, and everybody else is pretty much stuck. And they apply it to everybody. They apply it to, the communists did it, the Nazis did it, the Islamists do it. It's all the same thing. It's their way or the highway. You don't get to say what you want. You're not allowed to contradict them. It's a supremacy ideology. And they're all on the same side of the political spectrum for that reason, because of the way they choose to rule. So, they did call the Jews inhuman. They did call the blacks non-humans. They were animals. They did call that babies are just lumps of tissue. It's like an appendix. It's all the same supremacy ideology. This means nothing to us, so we can do what we want with it. That's where they're putting us. That's how they're framing the narrative. They've been preparing this battle space for decades, and we've been reporting it for more than a decade. And it's not going to change until either they don't have the power for a certain number of years to prevent them from advancing this sort of thing, or something really awful and horrible happens, which we don't want.
No, we don't. But it's they hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Yeah. And did you read about it may have been a congressman or a state rep in Texas, that when Beto said, "I'm coming for your AR-15, he said something to the effect that my AR-15 is ready for you, and his tweet got taken down in a hurry, but none of Beto's awful comments are ever taken down.
That's how it works.
No, and in fact, at some point during this broadcast, I hope that we also talk about Jan Schmidt and her attempted silencing of Granite Rock, because it's part and parcel of what we're talking about now.
It is. We can segue into that and then get to Mike's thing. I think we should talk about Schmidt.
Warning, this is not a safe space. I repeat, this is not a safe space.
Oh, feel the power.
Oh, I could feel it.
Our moment of triumph approaches. It's
GrokTALk.
Yes, we're talking about Nashua City Alderman, Ward 1, and New Hampshire State Representative Jan Schmidt, who is just tired of us talking about her all the time, and yet, well, she hasn't learned that we'll stop talking about her when she stops talking about us, because we double down. To those who haven't been following the saga on Granite Rock, Jan Schmidt is very upset that we keep talking about her, we keep quoting her own words, we keep putting up her voting record, and of course, Grokster Kimberly, because her daughter made what seemed to be a threat worthy of my AR-15 is ready for you, by talking about one of our friends and saying, my friends and I will end this woman, which was taken as a threat. And Kimberly reported upon it, put a picture of her daughter's image up. Her name is Heather Day, and she has continued to make similar types of issuance. Her mom, Jan Schmidt, said, "I'm so proud of you. I love you so much." We put those words up too. So she was the one who sent an email to our hosting company calling us a hate site, that we abuse her, that we're basically scum, just as we were talking about. Anything to be able to silence us, because I think she was trying to do to us what I believe the Nashua progressives, probably Jan Schmidt as well, though I haven't proved it yet, silence Josh Moore's The Patriot Initiative site for 2 days. And more of that story is going to be coming up in a little bit. And it's just a case of they can't stand the debate, as Steve, you said earlier. They don't have any rhetorical skills whatsoever. If they don't like you or like what you've written, they will just delete you, ban you, and in our case, trying to take apart I would say, the most consistent political blog site here in New Hampshire, us, mostly because we have deigned to stand up to her bullying. When you try to silence somebody for good, that's bullying. You're muted.
I know, and I was somewhere else. I wasn't even looking at the screen. Yeah, that's true. And I did read those emails. It was an interesting exchange. It's clear that obviously what her intentions were, but I was looking for some different language from her that I didn't see. Same intent, doesn't really matter. But we'll continue to keep you updated on that story. Skip will continue to post things up as things develop. We have a lot of other things that we have on the front and back burners all the time, always going. But we're going to move on because Mike wanted to give us an update about Brexit, which is becoming this regular part of our program. Since he can explain it better than anybody else, we like to do this. So you have an opportunity to know what the heck is going on over there.
Okay, I was just trying to do a little catch up there. I'm not as well informed this week because it's been a busy work week, but in rough terms, Parliament is prorogued until the Queen's speech in the middle of October, but there are legal challenges. The Remainers, mostly the Lib Dems and Labour Party, and some of the revolting part of the Conservative Party want to keep the EU tied irrevocably, the UK and EU tied irrevocably together, which is a terrible position to be in, as I've explained before. And Boris got the job specifically by saying he was going to go ahead and get out by the end of the latest negotiating deadline, October 31st, regardless. So these people tried to pass, well, they did pass a law saying essentially you can't exit without a deal. And that you must ask for an extension. The problem is that there's enough people within the EU, specifically the French presidents, the little pipsqueak Macron, and a couple of the others, that really don't want to give another extension because they can see it's not going anywhere. And they're almost ready to say, enough already, get out. The other pieces of this is everything that Boris has tried to do has been subject to legal challenges. If that sounds a bit like a president we know, it's not dissimilar. The deep state, the globalists do not want to give up. They do not want to give up on their project of tying more and more of the world irrevocably together under common sets of laws and ruling class that is further and further removed from the people. So we had the law that said you can't get out without a deal. You must ask for an extension, although I suspect Boris will do this in a way that they'll say hell no anyway. We had hopes that the Queen might refuse royal assent on said bill, but she decided not to, possibly so as not to get into the fight herself. I'm disappointed by that. The speaker, the parliamentary speaker, quit his job about a week ago. And this nasty little man with hair that looks like it's modeled after Boris, called John Bercow, schemed with the backbenchers and the opposition to rearrange the parliamentary order paper in order to get these bills, which were antithetical to Her Majesty's government, passed in the first place. He then quit his job and made it quite clear in his departure speech how much he despised the Brexiteers and the public who voted for exit. And he is now thankfully gone. And by the way, it was always the tradition that before ascending the wool sack, that is, sack full of wool that was traditionally the seat of the speaker, one left one's political leanings behind and simply presided over the House. Well, that's not been the case with this guy. And finally, there's the negotiations over whether Ireland should be split. Is the baby to be torn in half and thrown in the bathwater or something like that? There is the Southern Republic, Ireland, with its Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, and there's Northern Ireland, which is part of Great Britain. And there is no customs barrier right now. And the Brits don't want one, and the Northern Irish don't want one, and the Southern Irish would rather not have one. The problem is that Southern Ireland is remaining in the EU, and if Northern Ireland and the rest of Great Britain exit the EU, where do you draw the line for customs checks if you have them? And I think the British government is of the opinion, well, damn, we don't want to mess with this anyway. We're not going to put any checks in. You have a problem, you put up the customs posts. You piss off the people in Southern Ireland. And furthermore, the conditions that the EU have set for renegotiating what they call the backstop, i.e. where the line on customs and immigration actually gets drawn, is such that there is no position that the British government can take in response that will get them a new deal. So they've pretty much decided they're not going to bother with a new deal. but they are negotiating separately with the Irish government to try and work this out. I even saw lines on a map that suggested that the customs barrier, if any, would be in fact in the Irish Sea, meaning treat all of Ireland as one customs union, even though part of it technically belongs to Great Britain. It's going to be fun, folks, and it's far from over. And as I say, we have the prorogation of Parliament, that is, it's suspended until the Queen's speech, and there's legal challenges to that, and they want to come back and maybe a vote of no confidence and see if they can't put together a rogue coalition government of the backbenchers and the opposition. And once you get to that stage, you're going to have governments as stable as Italy, which is like New England's weather. Just wait 5 minutes and it'll change. Thankfully, the UK does not have proportional representation like most of Europe, which is why it has a relatively stable government.
So 2 points. First, I think people need to understand one of the reasons that we keep bringing Brexit up is something that you said in about one sentence, or maybe a sentence and a half, and that is that a lot of this has to do with rolling up the entire world into one government that is as far from the people as possible, which describes everything the Democrat Party tries to do. And I think they need to understand that if you look at what happens in Brexit with regard to the EU and Great Britain and even Ireland, who I imagine would love to not have any tariffs because they would become incredibly wealthy if everything just poured through Northern Ireland into Ireland, tariff-free, and then back into the EU and watch them all go, blah! That'll never happen because those scumbags won't let it. But I just thought it was.
And indeed, Ireland has lower taxes even than the UK, and is a magnet for businesses, especially for global corporations wanting to do business in Europe. So they don't want to spoil that.
Another big story this week, Jerry Nadler, who has been running the Justice Committee in the House, has been talking about impeachment. Nancy Pelosi in leadership has been saying, that's not a good look for us. We're not really there. Well, apparently they announced, at least Nadler's committee announced, that they were in the process of trying to formulate some rules or some guidelines on how they would go about proceeding with impeachment. And the real goal here, of course, was to try and do an end around to get access to testimony, which was otherwise protected. And the Department of Justice saw what they were doing and said, sorry, we can't give you grand jury testimony because it's protected until you actually announce we are performing this specific investigation into impeachment for this purpose. So the DOJ said, screw you. And I find that to be fascinatingly hilarious because, they think they're being clever. And Bill Barr, who is a genius, just said, no, you actually have to come out and say we're going to impeach him and we're going to investigate him before we'll give you any of this testimony because it's protected.
I think it's terrific. Nadler keeps looking like an impotent little fool, and that's on a good day, and he just can't help himself.
Well, I'm not sure that he's little. You do know that his nickname is Fat Jerry, but he certainly, his brain is rather vacuous. And once again, we see the pontification of the socialist saying, we will do all manner of kinds of things. And he's been there long enough that he should know what the rules and regulations are for doing such. So either that or he's got a very incompetent staff or both. This is all a show. This is just to keep this thing rolling until the election comes up. They're not going to find anything. They're going to make hay over a water drop as opposed to a pool. And they're going to say the pool, the water drop is the size of a pool, and everybody's going to go, yeah, right. They've got nothing at this point. With all of the traction that the Democrats could have brought towards this, you would think that anybody inside or outside of Congress would have brought up or found something that would have had stature enough to do this. They haven't, and I hate what I'm about to say because we saw this happen during the Clinton administration, except there was something for him to be impeached upon, but the whole idea was move on. There's nothing to see here, folks. Well, he lied to us, and that cost him Clinton's license, and a lot of other things. But in the grand scheme of things, he was brought up, but couldn't be found impeachable, and it just dropped. This is nothing more than just a political ploy. They have nothing. They can't do anything else.
Yeah, I did see some opinions a few months back that what they're really waiting for, and the reason they won't let this go, is if Trump gets reelected, but they have a decent number of Democrats in the House and Senate, they're still going to keep after him to see if they can't drum him out of office like they did Nixon. Because if Nixon pissed them off, that was nothing. What really got their goat was Nixon got reelected handily. And that is why they went after him and impeached him anyway.
GrokTALK.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is the repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Okay, we're going to move on because I'm sure Skip has something else he wants to share with us today.
Probably you're talking about SB 263, is that correct?
That could be on the table, sure.
Sure. Well, this was the bill that was signed back in July by our erstwhile conservative governor, Chris Sununu. He's been real good on guns. He's been real good on fiscal issues. More power to him for that, and we thank him for that. But our motto is thank them when they do right and then spank them when they do wrong. SB 263 was the bill that basically created transgender rights to bathrooms and locker rooms. And my school board immediately, upon the umbrance of one family with one child in a school district of over 1,000 kids, declared all bathrooms and all locker rooms to be gender neutral. In other words, they succumbed and used the language of the left to be able to coerce behavior and coerce speech and the very worst, coerce thoughts of everybody else. And I went to the school board meeting. I've posted up the video. And essentially what they have done is that they've chosen to raise up the rights of a transgender child over the rights of anybody else. And they picked and choose through SB 263 because in there's also age discrimination, sex discrimination, color discrimination, national background discrimination, religious discrimination. So what about the folks that believe that there are just only two genders because of deeply held religious beliefs? You're now discriminating against them. And the superintendent made it abundantly clear that it was reverse discrimination because if you remember how this whole movement started, it was by somebody who was transgender, got upset that they were relegated to a single-user bathroom somewhere in their building or had to go to the nurse's office to use their bathroom and said that was discrimination. So what did the superintendent of Guilford do, Kirk Beitler? He put out an email announcing the policy right off the bat, which isn't even finished being written yet, and said, well, we have so many single-user bathrooms in the elementary school, and we have so many instances in the middle school and in the high school. If you feel uncomfortable with a transgender person in your regular multiple person bathroom or locker room, you can go use those facilities. Aren't we spinning it right back to the beginning of the circle?
Shouldn't this be exact opposite? If they have put enough single-user bathrooms to cover people with disabilities, people needing to change babies, yeah, that happens in school too, or people who feel generally uncomfortable with public exposure, that perhaps the peculiar people that think there's something else ought to be using those and not the other way around.
The point is that, let's use the blacks on the bus example. So for years, the colored Americans were forced to sit in the back of the bus. And somebody said, well, that's wrong, because it was wrong. And then we have Rosa Parks and everything else. And eventually everybody said, well, you can't do that. Well, this isn't the same situation. In this particular situation, what they're saying in Guilford is, okay, transgenders have to use the bathroom in the back of the bus. They can't use any other. the fix for that is that transgenders can use any bathroom, and everybody else has to use the bathroom in the back of the bus.
Yeah. Well, I'm waiting for high school boys or high school girls to say, okay, well, we're all going to line up at each of these few single-user bathrooms, and we refuse to use, all of the multiple-person bathrooms and locker rooms. In other words, basically haul out Saul Alinsky's tactic that was used at the Chicago airport, so that all of his followers would rush into the bathrooms when large planes would land, forcing everybody running off the plane to find a bathroom, having to run even further before soiling themselves. And it was a very effective tactic because during the school day, as we all remember, you've got limited time to transit from one classroom to another. And if you can only use one bathroom, they've now done it to themselves. They also have forgotten that because age is also part of the anti-discrimination stuff, I can now go into the school, claim I'm a 17-year-old junior girl, and I can go into any bathroom or locker room that I want, and they can't stop me. I pointed this out to the Guilford School Board, and they just kind of stared at me in horror with deer light and headlights kind of look, saying, he can do that? Yes, because you failed to read the law, and the law was failed to be read by everybody else with the intent of, what will the law of unintended consequences work here? And then I've got several other constitutional issues with it, but I'll let somebody else talk first.
Well, and not only that, what are they going to do when they get the first inevitable case of rape from a predatory male being in the wrong bathroom? And let's face it, it's the men that are the predators, not because the feminazis say so, but because that's the way it works, whether they're predatory in the normal sense or predatory homos or what. It's usually the men with some kind of psychological problem that cause these issues.
Well, there's a part of it, too, of the new policy that basically says that brings pronouns into this whole thing as well, that every student has the right to be called by their name, regardless of whether the parents know or not. That's another issue, that the school isn't going to involve the parents and won't tell the parents what's going on in the school, but that every staff member or anything that goes on in the building, people have to use the pronouns that the student has said that they need to be done. So I'm supposed to, if I go into the school for some kind of vacation, be forced to use that person's preferred pronouns.
How the hell are you supposed to know that? Are they going to have name tags?
Well, I don't.
Like
I have no idea. Yeah, or what the left is doing on Twitter. His, her, whatever. Mine are going to be His Royal Majesty and Most Excellency that must be obeyed. But, if I'm going to be subject to that, that is coerced speech.
I have a suggestion.
Coerced behavior.
I think
your pronoun.
Just call them all it and have done with it.
Your pronoun should be he who will call you whatever he damn well pleases.
That's true.
But
the grievance policy, and I've already put it up on an RSA 91A right to know demand, is it calls for, and if you continually do this, you will be considered in violation of this policy. The problem is that there's no stated penalty for being in violation, which means it's arbitrary and capricious. And right there, you've got a lawsuit that says, yep, up yours.
So basically, it's going to be a lawsuit factory like we predicted.
Yes, because I stood up in front of the school board, and I have it recorded that I am willing to be the manager of a crowdsourced gathering of funds to sue the Guilford School Board. And being a member of the Guilford Budget Committee, my first question really was, and by how much are you going to be upping your legal general ledger account number? They didn't like that either.
I bet they didn't, because
being on the budget committee, you can refuse to do that.
That was his
point.
Starve their legal fund and let them go down jointly and severally.
Yeah, there's other problems with that with the budget law, but go ahead, Steve.
Well, I was going to see if Mike had one more topic because we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. Anything?
Thinking, yes. Yeah. What about McCabe and the general lawlessness of the DOJ? So he appealed and lost his termination. And I think the way has been cleared for him to now be charged for his crimes they were. And he is on record as saying at the time when he was terminated that he's going to take other people down with him. So that's going to get really interesting. Just how much of a lawless mess is the FBI and DOJ? And is McCabe going to do that? Or are there other people that might be out to get him? Might it not be Arkansas this time? Who knows? But the man clearly committed crimes, lied under oath, was probably part of the fraudulent FISA submissions as well. And now, having lost his appeal of his termination, is in a position to be indicted for those lies. And I'm looking forward to the fireworks. You said Bill Barr was brilliant. I think he's letting this all play out. He's got his prosecutors and investigators at work, and in all good time. And if Trump's helping to orchestrate this, somewhere around October 2020, there's going to be fireworks like you've not seen since the 4th of July, 1776.
Well, John Durham, who is the prosecutor who is charged with investigating the investigation, I'm sure has I can't wait to see what he's got. I know the IG has been trickling out information on his investigation into the investigation. And I think that, it's going to be a little bit like the Acorn Breitbart videos where you'd get one and something would come out and everybody would go, no, that's just one. That's just it. Then the next week another one comes out. It just keeps happening. And they still keep stepping in the same trap over and over and over again. And I can't imagine that isn't how the next 12 months is going to go. McCabe was clearly at the center of all this. If you've not spent any time listening to Dan Bongino's podcast, I highly recommend it. He worked for the Secret Service. He's written 2 books on this Russiagate thing. You can go back and look for podcasts that cover every single corner of this investigation in great detail, and it's well worth your time to check it out. We could never do it justice here. I just want to point you towards the right resource. But McCabe's a dirtbag, and I really do hope that they indict him and he turns state's evidence and he brings all those bastards down, because this was nasty. People don't even begin to realize how corrupt Obama's FBI and DOJ were and what they tried to do and what they did do and just how illegal it was.
Right, and there's more. You mentioned a very good resource there. And you need to watch the work done by the DC Daily Caller News Foundation, and also by Victoria Tensing and Joe, name escapes me. There are other
Sarah
lawyers
Carter, John Solomon, all great people to check out on this investigation.
Yeah. But there's more. The former Southern New York prosecutor, Andrew McCarthy, who writes for National Review, who helped prosecute the Blind Sheikh, who believed that the DOJ and the FBI were, in fact, bastions of integrity. When this stuff started to go down, he didn't believe it could be possible. He told his buddy Rush Limbaugh those same things. And as he started to investigate, he started to realize that not only was it possible, it was far worse than anything he could have imagined. He documented it. It reads like a spy thriller. It is called Ball of Collusion by Andrew McCarthy, writer for the National Review. Also highly recommended. And you probably can't get your hands on a hard copy right now. It's sold out for a while, but you can get your Kindle or Nook copy and download it and read it.
We'll proceed. We got a couple more minutes left. Any cleanup we want to go over? Actually,
well,
I got something. Just wrote about it today. Valerie Plame is running for Congress in New Mexico in a D+8 district. All she can do is make herself lose. And she's running on Trump and Bush pardoning Scooter Libby, who was charged with a lot of different things, but all he really ended up getting indicted for was process crimes, for not being able to remember something the FBI had on paper that he apparently said 2 years ago. And so they basically arrested him and charged him, and he was convicted. And George Bush didn't completely exonerate him. He just removed the prison time. He left everything else in place. He was still guilty of a felony. He was still forced to pay the fine, which was something like $350,000. And all Trump did was say, well, you're not really a felon. I'm just going to get rid of that. And so Plame is running on these statements about how she was wronged by these presidents. And if she were to have made those statements 2 years ago in front of the FBI and was then brought forward with her current statements, she could be tried and charged with the same process crime that Scooter Liberty was indicted for. Scooter Liberty. And so I think that's hilarious.
I think it's hilarious that Trump has belatedly pardoned a couple of the people that W didn't pardon, and I think that's wonderful. And yes, we can only hope for her to have a worthy opponent down there in New Mexico. And maybe we can say there was a Plame out.
All right, that might be all we can take for 1 week. We have pretty much used up an hour as promised, and hopefully this recorded properly, and Skip can toss it up there and I can go get it, and we'll have some audio tonight or tomorrow. And we'll be back next week to do it again. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and attention. Enjoy your evenings.
And you too.
Thank you.
GrokTALK.